Communication can occur verbally or non-verbally. A coach must know how and when to switch between these two modes of communication during sport. Verbal communication is the quickest method of getting across information and will be used when the coach has a tight time constraint. For example, a timeout in basketball is very rarely longer than a minute, so verbal communication would be used as it is appropriate. However, there are a few negatives to purely communicating verbally. It can be boring for the performers, leading to a lack of concentration. This can be dangerous if the coach is trying to tell the performer rules which are only there for their safety. If the performers are not listening, then it can endanger them. For example, the coach is telling the athletes to take piercings out before getting on a trampoline, and to tell the trampolinists that they need to be spotting for their teammates. If the instructions are said verbally, it could be boring and the performer may not be listening, or may be overloaded to them. Often verbal communication is not appropriate for beginners as it can be too confusing and the information can be overloaded onto them, especially if it is feedback on things like technique within a complicated skill. The complicated language can lead to the beginner being confused and not able to depict a mental image of the skill. This can demotivate the beginner, which would negatively affect their performance. This leads me on to when you would use non-verbal communication. Beginners is a prime example to explain skills and how the action works. A beginner would not be able to process complex steps when it is only said to them, especially if they are young. They will need to visually see this action occurring. Another time when non-verbal communication is the most appropriate method of communication is when there is a lot of background noise and your voice may not be audible to the other performers. For example, in a sport that's played inside, for example netball, often the gym echoes and the acoustics make it really difficult to talk. Whenever the performers are far away from you, it can mean the actions like gestures are the best way to communicate. For example, if there is a player on the other side of a rugby pitch, the best way of communicating would probably be through gestures. Otherwise, the player would have to run over, or the coach would shout, but then the message could be misheard. Communication comes in many different forms, with different forms of communication being appropriate for different situations. The 5 types of communication I'm going to speak about is instruction, safety, behaviour management, encouragement, and constructive feedback, and how these are needed for a coach during sport. Communication would be used to give players instructions. For example, the coach may instruct a badminton player to collect the shuttlecocks after practicing a specific shot for 10 minutes. Communication would be used for encouragement, which is key among players that doubt their ability. For example, a young gymnast during a floor routine makes a small mistake, which makes her panic. Communication would be needed to help the gymnast keep calm. Communication would be needed for behaviour management, especially within a large group of people like a cricket team, as good communication will mean people in the team are less likely to act inappropriately or dangerously. Feedback is a part of communication. It should be used differently in different situations. I explained when verbal and non-verbal communication should be used, so I will not speak about this again. Feedback can come in positive or negative form. Many performers think that negative will aid them more as it shows where they need to improve. Personally, I agree with this theory, but only if the performer is able to take negative feedback. Often beginners and young players struggle to receive negative feedback as it can be demotivating, especially if they do not receive any positive feedback. Positive feedback is used to stop performers from becoming demotivated. If the result isn't good, positive feedback will often be given to keep the spirits high. This leads me on to feedback around performance instead of outcome. Feedback will be given on either outcome or performance. If a team keeps losing, feedback will be given on the performance aspects like technique. However, in a more professional team, then feedback will be based off the outcome. Good time management leads to a smooth, efficient running training session, something a coach should be striving to achieve. A smooth running session means there will be more time for activities, which therefore means that it will benefit the performer. However, if a session is run poorly, sessions may overrun. This could be a problem in sports, for example when the venue is hired, like swimming or dance. If a coach overruns, they may not have covered everything properly, and information that needs to be given at the end of the session may be skipped, leading to problems if performers do not have the correct knowledge. For example, a hockey team's training session overruns and the coach does not get time to tell the players important information like change of venue for their next fixture. Time management is all based around structure and keeping to a structured schedule. There are 2 types I'm going to talk about, when a structure will help the coach manage their time. Training sessions consist of 3 parts, and this structure helps the coach to achieve their goals. A warm-up to get blood pumping around the body and prevent injury from occurring. A skills and drills section so the new content can be learned and rehearsed out of a game environment. And finally, a conditioned game where the skills that's been learned can be applied in a competitive environment. Following these steps in a training session ensures that the time is correctly managed and everything is achieved. For example, in netball there is an hour session, 10-minute warm-up followed by 30-minute new content drills, then 20-minute game. This prevents overrunning and ensures that the athletes get to experience both new skills and then applying them. There is also season structure. Most sports follow a season structure. I will explain two types. There is the type that a netball team would follow, where they have a pre-season, a competitive season, and then a post-season. The coach needs to manage their time in all three of these parts, as the coach needs to make sure the performers have enough time to get fit enough in pre-season, enough time to play competitively, and that the coach allows enough time in post-season for the performers to allow recovery to occur. In other cases, this may slightly change. An example being an athlete who competes in the Olympics will have an overall 4-year cycle, with smaller cycles within that. It is important that this is optimised and not wasted, and then a huge rush to get your athlete ready for the Olympics right before they start. Organisation is key to keeping a safe environment where progression occurs. A big aspect of organisation is how to organise groups. Grouping people into appropriate groups is important, as if weaker players are played against stronger players, they can become demotivated, and when the games can be overwhelmingly unfair. Also, if a young age group is played against an older age group, there is a possibility of injury occurring, especially with sports such as rugby, boxing and judo, as these are full of contact situations where a younger age group could be outmuscled and then potentially hurt. The coach would want to avoid this, and therefore they must organise their teams to prevent this from occurring. There are 3 parts to a training session. I won't go into lots of details as I explained it briefly in the time management. Time management and organisation link. Good organisation will lead to good time management. Sessions should be organised before they start. There should be a plan to how they will run and selected times so that they don't have the ability to go over. A thorough plan would prevent all possible outcomes. A more organised session would hopefully prevent the likelihood of injuries and arguments occurring. If a coach is aware of any apparent arguments with team members, they would organise the team so that they are separated. For example, a volleyball team has 2 players that do not get on. The coach can separate them to stop any arguments from occurring. With good organisation, this can be done easily. There are 3 steps to a training session: a warm-up, skills and drill section, and a game. If organisation occurs, then the coach should be able to cover all 3 of these sections to an adequate level and get the results from that session. Communication needs to be organised, as if something goes wrong, there needs to be a way of communicating with you. For example, if a gymnast injures themselves badly, they may need to call emergency services for an ambulance. Hiring an appropriate venue as a coach is also important, as if the coach is not well organised, this can put performers at risk, especially if the venue is not appropriate for sport, like doing trampolining in a room with basketball hoops, where there is a danger of the performer injuring themselves. Transport has to be arranged, as there may be some extra transport needed, or parental permission. If, say, a swim team that are made up of minors need to transport to their venue, there will need to be parental permission. However, there is one negative I want to point out. Coaches can become dependent on organisation, and the sport can seem regimented, therefore demotivating the performers due to tedium.